What's up, guys? It is time for our Cypher episode. And it's going to be interesting today because we don't have Sean, which is, as you can see, well, we kind of have Sean. We have some images of Sean that Mike has lovingly added. So we'll see a few different looks of Sean. So we get to have at least, some part of him here on today's show. Mike is definitely going to be doing a lot more talking on today's episode. So, how are you doing, Mike?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I've got this, like, my hair is expanding.
The froze back.
It's uh, it's definitely becoming a problem. Um, I've been watching a lot of shows about Vikings recently, so I've been tempted to kind of get that Viking, kind of get the like half buzz
Shave
cut thing going.
sides all the way.
Exactly. So we'll see how that goes. Um, but of course, I think at the top of the show we usually talk about news and so on, and just get a bearing as to like what's going on, what we think about it. And I think the biggest thing is just that the gamers they actually decided that, hey, by the way, in 2 weeks we're going to release the game now, which is kind of nuts because usually I feel like we never get something like that. We never get something like, hey, by the way, the game's actually coming out way sooner than you thought. That never happens in game development. So that's kind of cool. But do you think we're ready? Do you think they're ready, Mike?
I was kind of thinking it was going to be more towards like July and August when the game was going to fully launch, just because of like the most recent issues like FPS, hit reg, balancing was still kind of going on, and now all of a sudden it's kind of like out of the way. Oh, hold on one sec. Your webcam's broke now.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah,
Oh
one
god.
sec. Just keep talking. I'll fix
Is
it.
that my mistake or like what?
No, someone joined the channel, so Discord's shitty
Ah,
and just changes everything.
it's all good. Well, um, so yeah, I guess I'll just give a few of my first initial thoughts. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that it seems to be the case that Riot. I mean, they've already got a very polished product, and they've kept things pretty tight in terms of we've got three maps, and initially they went open with the beta with the friends and family beta with two maps, and then they added the third one pretty soon afterwards. And they don't. We know that they don't want a lot of maps. They pretty much have a full cast of agents. They announced that they're going to be bringing on board one more agent in a couple of weeks. So the release of the game will have some extra content for us to get our teeth into, which will be the new map, the new agent, and just basically the fixes. They did mention that there's going to be no update whilst the servers are obviously down. And before that point is so soon that there's no real point for them to kind of take the servers down and run an update. So we're not going to get, for those of us playing Valorant, we're not going to get any of those fixes that we want until the release, which is going to be in a couple of weeks, which is unfortunate. But I think a lot of us have learned to live with some of the FPS issues and various other things that have been currently plaguing the game. That again is closed beta. Hopefully, people will still be kind to them at the beginning of the game because we all know that most games are often shit for the first couple of years. So in terms of figuring out where does the game need to go in terms of direction, on top of just optimizing it and getting rid of the fluff and keeping the meat and making trimming the fat. So how's the have we fixed the situation,
We're
Mike?
back to normal. We're back
Okay,
to
cool,
normal now.
nice. Right. So what are your thoughts then in the fact that the game's coming out really soon?
I was kind of hoping for one more patch just before beta ended, maybe to see if they smoothed out a bunch of stuff, and I kind of get the direction why they went with just waiting till launch. I'm just more worried about like kind of leaves a bad taste in some of the beta players' mouths, and then if you go to launch and a bunch of stuff is still kind of messed up and people aren't liking it, it's kind of a bad look. But I think people have to look through it as like it took so long for Counter Strike to get where it's at, especially CS:GO. Like, there's just gonna be a lot of tweaking the first few years, and you're just gonna have to deal with it bit by bit. But
Yeah, such is the nature of things for sure. I think I think people really do forget like how long it took CS:GO to actually become a good game because ultimately Valve didn't do the first $1 million major until what I think was it 2016, I want to say.
yeah,
Or
late
kind of yeah,
2016, I think.
yeah, that makes sense. So in that sense, it's like there are a lot of developers that take this opposite approach. This was a really big issue with Quake Champions actually, is that they it felt very misguided what they were doing in Quake Champions. They had it seemingly it appeared like there was this disconnect between the publisher and the developer and the community, all of these disconnects. And you had the publisher Bethesda kind of like, here's this massive esports budget, we have an esports title in our within our ranks. It's software, is part of the kind of media conglomerates. So you have Quake. Let's get that on the go. Let's get the esports money going into that, and you guys can turn it around in like two years. And so they kick things off. I think while still in beta with like $1 million tournament whilst in beta. So it's kind of like very backwards. I think CS:GO did it in a much better fashion in terms of we'll let the game develop first for a couple of years before we actually start really throwing in the kinds of money that's going to hit headlines. Although that said, these days I'd imagine that $1 million isn't as headline worthy as it used to be.
Yeah.
So it is interesting from that perspective too. Do you think that because initially we've had these kind of like there's been a lot of rumors that the general approach is that things will be a little bit different in terms of the esports structure, at least for the first year or so. So it seems like there's this. It seems likely that they won't kind of lock things down immediately. So that it sounds like they're going to leave some breathing room for people to kind of innovate, figure out how broadcast might work, let the scene kind of organically grow with it before kind of being too strict with how everything is going to operate, and allow more grassroots activities to kind of do their thing. What's your sort of how do you feel about all of that?
I feel like the first year it's fine to like allow a bunch of people to do like the code red tourneys and stuff like that, just because the game is such a basic state, and there's no real like teams, like people are signing now, but they're still just starting, so it's not like there's any foundation for teams yet. So I think as time progresses, then Riot might start, feeling comfortable to host their own tourneys. They have their own like mechanics are set in the game. The meta's a little bit more defined. People have figured stuff out. So I think for the first maybe year to year and a half, we'll be seeing a lot more like smaller tourneys where it's just kind of like $5,000 cash prize type of deal.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there is a huge scope for this game. Like if it's hard to even in some respects look at it like any other game, and if we're trying to draw examples and references from history in terms of esports, because they're going to have access to a market that's much bigger than I think we've ever seen. I think it's fair to say bigger than we've ever seen before in any FPS, because there's never been an FPS game, to my knowledge, that has been as ubiquitous as this game could be. Because it's they should be able to capture the Asian market, which has been very difficult. Counter-Strike always had we always had this issue where we felt like, if we got the Asian scene into CS, it'd be really amazing because there's so many players, but also there's so much skill in that region. But then of course it had to compete against all these other games like Crossfire and these like massive titles that seemed, I suppose, culturally more relevant to the people in Asia. I don't know. I definitely am not an insider. I would probably have to ask Blair for some guidance on exactly some of the reasons as to why maybe games like Crossfire were so much more appealing. Or was it just like, was it the case like in South Korea, whereby StarCraft got really huge because at that specific time, everyone was looking for entertainment. Everyone was going to the PC bunks, these kind of internet cafes, and StarCraft was the game that was there at that time. It's just like, the right time, right place. Is it that kind of a thing? I'm not really sure. What I do know though is that this game is from the get-go, it's been tailored towards that market. So in that sense, it could really take over in terms of just how ridiculous some of the tournaments could look. These global tournaments could be really epic. It could be something like what Overwatch, I think, really wanted their game to be in terms of the global scale of it. There's definitely that potential within this game. So it definitely doesn't seem like they're going to have any issues getting, headline capturing prize pools or other events that may capture the headlines. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with that potential, that they know that they can leverage it. And they're maybe in a unique position to do that. So it's really interesting. But obviously, again, like that's definitely long-term stuff that I'm thinking about. What because we know they're adding a new agent, Mike. We already have this cast of 10 agents. Is there something that you think's missing, or that's very obvious that you could maybe make a prediction as to what we're going to see, or what do you think?
I think eventually they're gonna have to add some sort of like counter healer to Sage, like someone who's also a healer. The issue is I just don't know how you like make them different than Sage. Like you can't give them just like smokes or anything like Brimstone, because I feel like if you had a healer that also has smokes that you can execute with, that might be a little bit too overpowered. So I just don't know where you would try to differentiate them like ability wise.
Yes, it's interesting because the first thing that actually jumped to my mind was actually another duelist, because it does feel like you've got Phoenix, you've got Jet, and it really and I mean I guess like Raze is the duelist, but in terms of getting in, Raze isn't really as much of a getting in agent unless you're a god with the satchels. But that seems a little bit mad to use like double satchel jumps and stuff to like get in. So and Phoenix can flash his way in, and Jet can dash or uplift or use her I forget what they call the little cloud things that she throws around to get in as well, and so on. But so it feels to me like that there is maybe an opening in the duelist cast where they could do something quite creative with an agent. Do you feel this? Do you feel similarly, or do you think that role is kind of filled as it is?
Mm, I guess I just don't have a very creative mind in the first place, so I kind of struggle to figure out like what they would actually like do. Like to me already there seems like there's a lot of characters that like fit all the roles perfectly, so trying to be like, okay, let's add another duelist. Now what are we going to do that like sets him apart from the other three duelists like ability wise? And I'm just trying to think of, I don't think you could really do flashes again, but it would be kind of nice to have a third character in the game that has flashes that don't go through walls like breaches, so that might be a feature.
That would be interesting. It's funny actually. But Sherlock in chat just said a duelist with invis, which made me think of StarCraft again. So they could just add a shuttle with like a Dark Templar, just dropping Dark Templar all over the place. That would be fun.
If they
But
add invisible people, I will lose my mind in this game. Probably that will be the final straw.
it is pretty crazy. Like what? How would you balance that even? Like how would you balance an invisible dude? Even if it's just like it gets to go invisible for like 10 seconds. How do you balance that shit? Is that an ultimate? Like how
Has
does
to
that
be.
work? But then is there like a visual distortion? How visible is that? Are they
Yeah,
completely invisible if they're standing still? Like
there has to be
that sounds like a
something.
nightmare.
I like what Henro said in chat. May like create clones or something. May like as an ultimate, or they like one of their abilities. They could like just put a decoy or something out.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting because and I think this really goes to show like how good of a job I think that Riot's actually done. To their credit, it's very difficult to design agents with abilities, especially this many as much as they have, without having some like really gimmicky shit and being like, oh, let's just get the engineer in there, and then now you're turning into like Team Fortress or something like that. Whereas it just becomes a little bit too. There's just how like the agent design has to make sense in terms of consistency with the out the or like the end goal of the type of gameplay that you want to see, and you don't want anything to mess with the integrity of that. So the heart of it is like that's this tac FPS. I think that's a line that's already been balanced quite well, because if you consider the fact that we've got effectively wall hacks and all these kinds of abilities that normally would absolutely break this kind of game, they've actually managed to make that work quite well. So it does definitely feel like there is that they've got a pretty good team doing work on the agents, and I'm pretty curious what it's going to look like. You mentioned a controller, I mentioned a duelist. What is another class? The controller, duelist, initiator, I suppose. Wait, is that one? I don't even know. I don't even
I
really
always
learn the
forget
names
the
of the
other
classes.
names. Yeah.
But and yeah, you mentioned a healer as well. So I guess we kind of covered most of it there. It is interesting too because they have this. One of the things that Riot, in terms of the flow of the game, look for is they want it to be the case that it's not just like they want the flow of the game to be in phases almost, where it's about gathering intelligence. So what are you up against? Like figuring that out, and then maybe going and actually taking some map control or making an aggression, and then going for intelligence again. They really want it to be the case that you're using agents like Sova, you're using agents like Cypher, agents that can gain information through their abilities to make decisions. Because in Counter Strike, you don't necessarily have the ability to be as clear specifically because you don't have the wall hack abilities effectively, and you don't have stuff like tripwires or cameras or whatever it might be. So it's interesting in that sense that they've designed the game to have a flow that is a little bit more consistent in that sense and more predictable. But within the consistency, within the predictableness of it, there is still so many different agents. It can always play out very, very differently, depending on the map and the situation. So yeah, they've definitely got a cool thing going on with the current setup that they have. So we'll see exactly what it looks like. And I think poop underscore 27 definitely making a good point, which kind of goes to your point, in that it would be nice to have one more option for a healer that's legitimate, because this is another game design thing, I would say. It's this idea of opportunity cost, I suppose, in one sense of the term, whereby it should never be the case that if you have access, let's say you have $800 and you're making a decision between like what pistol to buy, it should never always be one pistol that you buy, because it's like, oh well, this pistol is actually better than all of the other pistols in every circumstance, close range, mid range, long range. Like it should, because that's what we had in Counter Strike with the Tech 9 for a while, with the CZ for a while. If you remove choices from the player, then it's just way more boring. Basically, the game is just way more boring and one dimensional. So it would be nice for them to add another healer just for that fact alone. So Sage is not an instant lock. I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people too, like we always see this a lot where if you're just like single queuing and you get in a comp and like, okay, you haven't locked in yet, you're picking this. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily like the best thing, because if they have no experience playing Sage, they're probably not going to be very good. And if they would just play a character that they're actually good at, you might get a better performance out of them. And I think if we have more options, people will be less likely to think about that in the distant future, when it's like you have maybe 15 agents or something, and it's not like, oh, these everyone has to pick these three agents. There's a variety then.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely going to be really fun, because I think because a lot of games haven't done this very well, and I think they definitely are on the right track. And there's lots of games where I see a lineup and I'm like, oh god, this lineup kind of sucks for some things. It would be great at other things, but the problem is that the people I'm playing with don't understand how to look at the game in this way. But if we're playing at a level in the future where people can like look at a composition, like in Defense of the Ancients, like actually no one ever calls it that, everyone calls it Dota. So like in Dota, when you can like just, there are definitely some requisites for a composition for what is effectively seen to be the optimal, most objectively good type of strategies. You're going to need a jungler. You're going to need, okay, if these guys have been banned and this is what's available in your pool, okay, well maybe you can do a tri lane. Like these kinds of ideas whereby everyone kind of in the general consciousness of, let's say, immortal level players, there is this idea of the varying strategies that can work for different maps. So that also means that you don't have a certain lineup. It means that you can be flexible with the lineup that you choose. But we're just not really there yet. There is not that level of understanding within the game yet, and the general consciousness of the player base. That will speed up enormously once there's a pro scene, I have no doubt, and content starts flowing through, especially from us, because we're gonna be telling you guys exactly what's up. But also, it should there is potential for this game to be super interesting, like as fun as Dota, but in the FPS way. Because Dota always captured me, because every single game is unique. Like it's a pretty compelling value proposition as a player, I would say. Um, Speaking of the pro scene, Mike, we've seen some some teams popping up, and the two most notable ones that have assembled esports rosters, although T1 hasn't completed theirs yet, I don't think, is T1, TSM, T1 and TSM. I guess are the biggest names. I don't think is there anybody else that's announced like a team? I think Immortals maybe announced
Yeah, I
a
think
team,
they
but it's
did.
not as known in terms of their players, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember who exactly they picked up.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up real quick, and you can tell us about T1.
Okay, so T1, let's see, let me pull up the doc again. We got Crashies, AZK, Food, Brax, Fraud as the coach. So Brax and AZK were the first two pickups because they're kind of like a bundle deal from CS. I think AZK is going to be really good at this game because he's just naturally good at every game he's ever touched. He's played Overwatch, played CSGO. We played him in one invite tourney, amazingly good. Food, I keep getting put up against him in solo queue and he keeps deranking me. Plays Raze all the time. I think he's going to be additionally good. I think that team just has a lot of really good aimers in general, just like Crashy's Food, AZK, Brax all have really good aim. I'll be interested who they actually get as a fifth. And I'm not sure about Fraud as a coach. Just from what I know in CSGO, I know he was really good in 1.6, but I didn't follow as closely. I'll just be interested to see like what he actually brings to the table in terms of like learning about the meta, adapting the team, coming up with new strategies and stuff like that.
Yes, I think what's actually pretty epic about this is that within, because in the notes that we have, we were going to talk about T1, TSM, and Fish 123, and I feel like Fish 123 is amazing because if you look at that, you mentioned Fraud. I like the contrast between a Fraud and a Sliggy. Although Sliggy is kind of old school, many senses, he never, as a player, rose to the heights as Fraud did in Fraud's chosen game. Siggy's always been a great player, but he's never been. I don't think he's ever necessarily aspired to be like a top level elite professional. And obviously, most people know Sliggy as the best observer in Counter Strike by quite a long margin. And I would add as well, one of the reasons why Sliggy is so good, as I know him quite well, I can speak to this, why he's so good as an observer is not just because he's very passionate and puts the work in. It's because he also thinks outside of the box. He's in a discipline where basically there's very few people that do it. There's less observers effectively than there are commentators even. So there's a very small pool of people, and he's the person that has most consistently chosen to think outside of the box to innovate in that position as opposed to just sort of doing it and just or copying other people. So he's very good at thinking innovatively, and that's something that's I think really helping Fish 123 because I know that Siggy's putting enormous degrees of time in actually basically finding stuff for them to be able to do, and because Valorant has so many different utility options. It's actually kind of insane the amount of possibilities that there are, and I know that he's actually found so much stuff because I was talking to him recently that he's just hiding, and he's just hiding it and just saving it for a rainy day, saving it for a moment when it's required. But for those of you that are not aware, Fish 123 are perhaps the most successful team, and they're mostly, I think they're almost all UK players actually. What's the lineup? Let me check the lineup real quick.
Yeah, I think most of them are fairly UK, and they've just been kind of shitting on everyone in the EU right now, so.
Right, yeah, and arguably the European scene in FPS is pretty much always, at least at the beginning, the best, and or has the deepest pool of talent slash skills slash is just generally harder. And indeed, so it's a team with I never know if it's actually I guess it's Eccles or Eckes because his last name is Eccles, but EC1S, so we'll say Eccles, Soulcast, Ardis, who's actually Danish, Cryptics, and Link, and then Stiggy is the coach. So Ardis is the only non-Brit, and he's a Dane. So they no sorry it's Latvian. Sorry, I quickly glanced over the flag too quickly. From Latvia. Apologies. So pretty impressive that they've managed to pretty much crush I think almost every single tournament they've played, except one where I think I'm just trying to see who did they lose to. Oh, that's not important. Either way, either way, it's I don't want to do too much Liquipedia-ing whilst I'm talking, but either way, it's interesting because what we've got here is we've got I feel like a lot of the old versus a lot of the new, and that's I think an interesting discussion point quickly. Because if we're thinking about this, TSM just picked up a roster with Hazed and Cutler on it, who are two players who quit effectively professional Counter Strike quite some time ago. They were there for the beginning, like years with CLG, and CLG was kind of a weird team in many respects because it was back when the North American region wasn't very good at all and had, you know, it's before Liquid's dominance. It was before, it was even before in some senses, or just as it was happening, that Fallen's team, with Luminosity and Kabum TD and all the rest of it, that they were only just getting good. So it's kind of that era where there wasn't really good North American teams yet, but CLG were one of the best, but they weren't really very good. And eventually they kind of phased out of things. Definitely good players, but you know, they weren't, you know, super top tier. So, but TSM, massive org, has signed the likes of, you know, Hayes, Cutler, Drone, Wardell, and Subrosa. Subrosa and Wardell, of course, I actually don't know too much about Drone, but Wardell and Subrosa are obviously very young and talented players individually, mechanically, but we don't know much more than that, I would say, especially when it comes to Valorant. So what's your take on this, Mike?
For me, it's kind of like the same thing when CSGO first started. You don't really have any players that know the game because the game's still being formed, so you bring in over a bunch of 1.6 players, so they kind of fill out the roster slots, and then a few years down the line, more of the prodigies start coming out of the woodworks. You get a few of them, start phasing out the old crew, bring in the new. And I think this is kind of like the same deal, because in these smaller tournaments where it's like, well, now there's going to be more teams in, but there's just random mixes and stuff. So you can put these guys in. They might just pub stomp them, get a few wins, do well, get some prize money. I think that's like the level that you can expect. They're still going to be like understanding the game, coming up with new stuff. But I think the interesting part will be like 2 years down the line. Then you get people that are like, oh yeah, I've been playing Valorant since day one and I didn't play CS, or I only played Valorant, or just some combination where they just like live this game.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm already like daily, I'm already impressed by what I see to be like very young talent bubbling up. And you know, we've already seen a lot of like no-name first generation players effectively who have good mechanics kind of from the get-go, looking pretty damn strong. And it's interesting because mechanics is not something that's really going to separate people that much, I would say, especially on the way up. It's really going to be about like how well you understand how to make decisions intuitively in the game. And this is like a whole separate topic that I'm definitely going to talk about at some point, but there's this issue which is a blessing and a curse, that if you've come from previous game, let's say Counter-Strike, you've learned all of the fundamentals, the principles, the theory, the things that make sense. There's definitely lots of advantages because you can walk into a game like Valorant and be like, okay, cool, I just kind of get most of the concepts here. However, there are a lot of nuanced details which, you know, you will not have sort of developed the logic and intuition to act upon yet. And you're probably going to have more conflicting ideas there, intuitively speaking. And the game's always going to be played at that intuitive level than a first gen player that's kind of coding themselves, you know, just with just this game in mind. So they're going to be able to kind of rise up more quickly, I would imagine, in a lot of cases. So it's going to be interesting to see what kinds of talent we're going to get through on this game, for sure. With that said, we should go into the Ask Us Anything portion because we have a lot of Cypher stuff coming up, and we'll do this for 10 minutes as we do every show. I think this has been a lot of fun. It's been really, like, you guys are actually, the guys who tune into our show, you know, are amazing. You know, you guys always ask great questions. It feels like you're very intellectually engaged, and it's always fun jamming out with you guys. So if you have any questions for us, you know, please start, you know, shoving them into the chat, and we'll kind of chat about chats and respond to them. So Poop27 says, by the way, this reminds me of this old thing for those StarCraft fans. There used to be this segment on one of these GSL shows where there was where Artosis would always interview a Korean player. And it's really funny because the guy would maybe have like a translator next to him or something like that. And he'd come over to Artosis, and Artosis would field community submitted questions. And then it was really funny because this Korean guy obviously doesn't really understand the English. And there's always this one guy that would ask questions called Poop Feast 420. And so Artosis would always just be there giggling to himself. And this Korean guy just has no idea what was going on. It was always quite funny. So you're giving me throwback StarCraft 2 GSL vibes there, Poop 27. So I appreciate that. Every show needs their own Poop username. So uh, so you'll think when they release the game, they'll add the option to actually pick maps like in CS:GO, or let it just stay random until they get more maps. Would be nice to have less RNG. This is a great question actually, because Mike, if the matchmaking is more serious, then you shouldn't just be able to be a vertiglobal, right?
Right. And I think the issue is like, since we're at such a limited amount of maps right now, you kind of have to force people to play just whatever maps are in the pool. Otherwise, it's just going to be like you said, one map every time people just spam. But the issue at the same time is like right now you just get people that dodge if it's bind or split or whatever the case may be, because the penalties aren't as serious because it's beta, so who really cares? But it'll be interesting. I would like to see just more maps in general that kind of differentiate, and then maybe we can look at the option of you can pick whatever maps you can queue.
Yeah, it definitely could be something that like actually factors in. They could make it factor into your ranking actually, is your ability to play different maps and sort of your kind of how dispersed you are across the various maps. Maybe it's the case that if you're someone that only queues Mirage, let's say, you don't queue any other map, and you open yourself up for a queue, that you actually have a ranking that it's kind of tethered to your performances on the maps. So let's say you play every map equally. So you play like in Valorant when there's 4 maps, let's say, like you have like almost like 25% uh split between the maps that you're playing. Distribution, that's the word I was looking for. Maybe it's like, well, okay, this is just your rank then, but maybe it could be the case that for specific maps you have more weight, like you're weighted towards certain maps and compared to others. Then you're going to get a harder pool of players, the ones you play the best on and you play the most often. That could maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's too complicated, I don't know. But I do think that this is definitely a very good point, because there are people that just want to be demand. This has been happening for like I think I've been playing games competitively since like 1999 basically, and I've known people that specialize in like one map since 1999. So this is I think a really important point, because there's so many players like that. So I'd like to see something that actually accounts for that fact, so that everybody can get involved in competitive, because ultimately it's also a good way to get good at the game, is to pick one map that you want to specialize in and then kind of branch out later on if that's something that interests you. And it doesn't really harm anybody in any sense. And it also helps to decrease variance too, because what if you get that guy who only plays Mirage and you're going to play a Cobblestone, and he's decided that day that he wants to play some Cobblestone for whatever reason? Like that's gonna be a huge problem in terms of the skill distribution. So I think that could make sense. Right. What changes would you like to see to competitive on full release, Mr. Mike?
Um, I think solo duo queue is a must at this point, and like 5-stack queue, even though they said they aren't going to do that. But I don't know, I just find like a large issue when you get grouped together and it's like, oh, you are playing by yourself, and now here's a 5-stack of a bunch of like streamers or semi pros or whatever the case may be. You just get kind of screwed over, because then you're going up against their chemistry and you've been dropped in with a bunch of random people that you've never talked before in your life. So I think that's pretty important in terms of queue. I think there needs to be probably harsher punishments for people dodging or throwing of some sort. Just like, I feel like the report system doesn't really do a lot right now in terms of that. Timeouts would be good, at least just one, because there's a lot of cases where people have to randomly get pulled away for like 30 seconds, but then you're kind of screwed out of that round because there's no way to pause the game or stall it in any way. Those are just the ones that come off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting, because this game there's definitely so much stuff that CS:GO never needed to really do, because of their whole philosophy is effectively this like very laissez-faire type of system, where it's like, you know what, fuck it, we don't have to. We here's our service. If you don't like it, cool. If you like it, great. Whatever, we don't care. And so it just allowed, and they also allow for third-party services to fix the problems. So then you get a Faceit, you get whatever, an ESEA, third-party services to fix these issues. But now we can actually be like, okay, well, they actually are looking at this as a competitive experience first and foremost. Like it's not the same as Counter-Strike, I would say. In all the communications we've had from Riot, that this has been this is an esports title from the ground up. And you can argue, of course, Counter-Strike is as well, but the way that they're looking at it is, with Riot as well, as it seems like they want everything to be really tied in together. They want the experience from the bottom to the top to be tied in together and to make sense. Whereas in Counter-Strike, the experience as a casual and experience as a professional are very disconnected in many, many ways. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how they connect all of those things. Like, for example, in the, again, I don't know much about League, but they have the ability for you to get noticed if you're able to like go up through matchmaking, and get into Challenger and so on. You can, that's something that you can do. Doesn't exist in CS:GO. So kind of curious to see how that plays out for them and what they're going to prioritize, because I think this, so going to another question about should there be rankings per agents? That's, I think, a really, really good question, because is it the case that playing these different, like, would that improve the competitive experience? Because if it would, I think there's an argument to do it. And is that something that you think would make sense, Mike? Because there's definitely some arguments against it too.
I can see both sides of it. So the positive would be you would get people that would probably put more work into one character and put like a lot of effort into learning lineups and what I should be doing in these scenarios, or this is where I should position myself. The issue I see is when you get two people in a game that want to play the same character, and then that becomes kind of a shit fest. But I don't know if you would have it so you queue as the character before the game and it randomly puts you in a team together. That could be interesting as well, but
there's also another point against it, which is the case that if you're allowed to just play one dude, then what happens is you're in a position where the lineups are more locked before the game has started, which, and again, I don't know how this is going to work, because in the future it would make, because right now they've hidden the opposing side's picks. I don't know that it's going to be like that forever. Like, because this is also, we've actually never talked about this, but I think this is a really interesting point. Right now, again, the picks of the enemy team are hidden. And there's definitely an argument, and will be an argument in the future, strategically speaking, to see what your opponent's picking and want to have a certain composition against that. And because you might want to have certain ways to deal with what might be, at the time, in meta strategies or tactics. And so, should that remain hidden? Will there be a veto system? Will there be a pool where, you actually get to take turns in picking? Will they do a draft for competitive in the future? Like, there are some interesting ideas there. But as I say, I actually think that they won't do it, because I don't think they're going to want to have a case whereby people can just lock in agents before the game, before the map is known, before the teammates are known, before the opponents are known. I think that might drift too far away from what I think they're going to see as their competitive experience. So yeah, I can see it going either way, but I can definitely see the arguments both sides as well. And we can quickly answer one more question. Right, got to pick one. Let's see. Do you want to pick one, Mike?
Sure, let me scroll through them.
Yeah.
Full sight executes in the game. I feel like defaulting is much more effective at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I think so. That's a very interesting point. I think it's like this, for me at least. We can use CS:GO as a really good example, because this has just been historically consistent. Whenever there's a new map that's in play, it's usually CT sided, even if the map's architecture isn't necessarily obviously very CT sided, even if it's like 50-50 in how the angles have been designed and everything else for the map. But it takes a long time for people to understand how to use utility. to its best effect on the attack. When that stuff starts to happen, when people start to figure out, oh, this is actually extremely strong. You only need 2 guys to actually take this area, and the response to hold this area would be an inverse. Like would I guess I'll use plain language. It wouldn't be a good value exchange. So either they would have to overcompensate and burn too much in one area to deal with it, or they just let you have it and then respond elsewhere on the map. Um, for example, you can say an example of this in CS might be having on cache 3 CTs in mid for a really long time. Sure, you're going to be able to stop the mid takes later rounds, but you have this massive sacrifice because then you've only got one anchor on either side of the map, and that allows this bomb sites to be way more easy to take. So it's not really an investment that's worth it at that point in the round. So once you figure out in Valorant, similarly, what are the most effective ways to approach taking certain positions or pressuring certain amounts of utility away from your opponents and so on and so forth, I think things will change. I think things will become actually a little bit more attack sided, and there'll be that back and forth when then the defenders have to kind of figure out, okay, well, what is the best response to this? Because all of the resources are extremely important, and right now people are just dumping the resources haphazardly without really understanding when they're going to need those resources. Because we're definitely going to see teams that are going to be extremely good at saving everything for the moments they are needed. And those teams will succeed much more consistently than others in the current state of the game. So I just think that it's hard to really judge how the game's going to look just yet because it's so early on. And to be honest as well, like defaulting is effective because people just love dumping utility right now. That's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, and I think full site executes don't work like at all at the beginning of rounds right now, and I'll give one reason: Sage slow orbs. And I was trying to think of like ways to just counter it if you wanted to hit a site like early and Sage might be there, can be a rotator. And the ways you can really counter it are like Jet and Omen. Those are the ways you get past it really without any of the effects. And I was always kind of like, oh, that's not really like enough. But it's like, well, maybe if you have Sage wall off one side and you're dropping smokes on the site and Omen teleports into one of the smokes and Jet dashes through, while those two are fighting, that might buy the other 3 people enough time, because it's 5 seconds you have to bypass for that slow orb. That might just be enough. It's kind of like in CS when you kind of have like 2 people go out and you throw a little bit of utility to get them out, and then you re-exec later on.
And you can even add Raze into the mix. If you want a third person, they can go over the ice with the satchels.
Yeah.
You've got 3 people into the site now. So, absolutely. Right. So, with that, by the way, that's actually amazing. I haven't actually even thought about doing that. Just trying to like force the way through with the agents that can, and then maybe having the Viper and the Brimstone in the back as the other 2. And you've got this super aggressively tooled composition. That's actually really interesting. Because the other team would have to actually account for that and have certain setups to deal with that. Maybe have less mid presence because they're worried about this very heavy set piece based attack. Really interesting. And we don't really have time to go too much further into that because we are going to be moving on to a pretty meaty section on Cypher. But first, before we do that, Mike, we should really decide who we're going to pick. I'm putting everyone on the spot here because we haven't really thought about this too much. Who we're going to pick for the next taking agency segment. And you guys can, if you have any people or any agents you'd really want to see desperately that we haven't done yet, then feel free to, weigh in in the chat. But yeah, I'm actually thinking we could do a multi-agent episode, Mike.
Oh,
Brimstone
really?
definitely strikes me as one that could be pretty cool because you're a Brimstone main. I don't think you've ever touched any other agent in the game.
Not unless I have to. We have Raze, Jet, Sage, and Brimstone left for anyone curious.
Right. I think that doing Raze and Jet or Raze and Brimstone could be pretty cool. Maybe we just throw them all into one episode, make like a mega episode.
Be here for like 4 hours.
Yeah. And we can do it as like a special, or we can split it up because we're gonna have a lot of downtime coming with a lot of downtime we're going to have, obviously, I mean, of the beta. So it's, people will be definitely looking forward to seeing some of the content during that period, I think.
I feel like Raze and Jet you could pair, because a lot of the stuff that I would talk about with Jet is kind of like, oh, if you have her ult, you can, like, if you're outside A heaven, rotating through CT like A link from B, you can updrift and look over the site with your ult and just kill people from the sky without even entering the site. So there's just a bunch of stuff like that all across the maps.
Right. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll just announce it in a tweet, Mike, because I feel like we could do something pretty cool for this. So, and then we'll let everybody know. So stay tuned on the tweeters, and we'll let you know precisely how we're going to be handling the next taking agency, whether we do a mega episode or otherwise. We will let you know ASAP. And that now nicely moves us into Cypher, and we had one of our viewers, Doug Clark. Thank you very much. He submitted a lot of Cypher content, which kind of overlapped with some of the stuff I was already looking at. So we are going to be using a lot of his content here on the show to kind of just go through some of the ideas with Cypher and just talk through them as the videos play. But also, Cypher was nerfed. And, we talked about this on the previous show with Sean, actually. And we've kind of weighed in as to how we thought, we talked about the nerfs, like what the nerfs were and how we felt Cypher was as an agent. Riot basically wanted him not to be as nearly as good as Sage in terms of slowing people down. So they made the cage not slow you now. So it's a little bit less effective in that sense, but it's still very good. So we can kind of start loading up some of the Cypher stuff. I think we have bind to start with, and just start playing those. Right. Okay. So there's so much stuff here when it comes to Cypher. I think one of the interesting things here we're going to see is camera placements, and we're going to be seeing a lot of this on these videos that Doug has made. And what I really like about these camera placements is that a lot of people have been so this is actually one of the changes, right? Now you're more punished if you use cameras aggressively. The camera is destroyed. I believe it was taken from like 30 seconds or 35 seconds, cooldown to 45, which is where it is now. So you're more incentivized to use a camera placement that's going to be useful for pretty much the whole round. And using it aggressively has been nerfed. So I like these cameras because they're really good for retaking. And I think that's really where the biggest value of cameras is, in my opinion at least. Because when you're retaking, finding out the positions of the opponents is extremely key. And with all of the abilities that can be thrown, that have splash damage, that can be thrown around corners, whether it's Razor's bombs or Sova's darts or Sova's ult or like whatever it is, it's like Molotovs and so on, and just being able to clear positions and with certainty, that is just very powerful for a retake. And I feel like that's where the major value is with the cameras at this point.
Yeah, and I feel like people with cameras, especially the glitch cameras, they get like such a flawed view of how they should be using them. It's kind of like, oh, I should be putting them in spots that no one can destroy them, or I get such a good advantage because they add like the red blinking light or whatever. And I feel like the red blinking light could be changed in the future because I think it's a little bit excessive as well. But people don't realize, like with Cypher, you can put the camera in less discreet spots, like above where they're coming out, just to start dueling them once they get out. Because if you have it set up properly, like let's say you're Haven, or not Haven, Bind on B, you can have your camera above Hookah or above Belong when they run out, and you can just wait until they hit your tripwire or like they're splitting the site, and you have all that information instead of just like, oh, I have my camera on the back of site, and now I see that they're in Hookah, and now my camera's destroyed. Like, they're going to be coming from that point, so all you really do with that camera is just identify who's there. But the way you should be doing is, like, setting up so when they're out, you know which duels you should be taking. Like, oh, this guy's looking over here, they're split up this way. I know if I peek this side, I have one person on this side and two people on the other. It's such a like good tool to divide up fights, and I feel like a lot more Cyphers are starting to catch on to that instead of just like, oh, I'm going to use it as a spotting tool.
Oh yeah, there are like these spots. I think positionally speaking, that are, as you say, like someone's coming up and they're about to take the engagement. They're moving from one somewhat safe position and they're in this kind of transitional position between where they want to be, whether maybe they have to entry to then have cover again and be able to be safe if they want and not in the open. And there are those spots where like it could be C long, for example, on Haven, where someone's coming up from C long, they're just entering the bomb site from C long, and then maybe that's when your camera spots them and you're behind the boxes. Now, if you hit them with a dart at that point, so that they have this decision: do they try to remove the dart? Do they get out of the open, or or do they leave the dart in and then try to duel you, where you have the cover and you know where they are? Suddenly, like this is now so useful in terms of getting the kill, especially on people that are lurking. If they don't have assistance, it's obviously easier, but you create these very difficult decisions for your opponent. So you've created a spot where you tactically are much more likely to be able to control the fight and actually get the kill. And so like securing the kill with that, I really like that as an idea. And I think as you say, Mike, it's like just the current the consciousness of Cypher players is definitely going to change, because also not just about like how we think about the cameras now and how as you said, the glitch cams, or using the cameras just to be like this sixth man so you can know when to rotate and so on, but also understanding what other tools do you have that do those jobs that aren't done by Cypher. And one of those agents is Sova. Sova has the arrows he can shoot an arrow from across from a different bomb site that will land in a forward position for the other bomb site. And it's like, okay, now on bind I know that there's no one B long, or I have a very good guess as to there being no one B long. So now you have other abilities that can kind of fill the holes in that, so that Cypher can do other stuff with his tripwires or other stuff with his camera, whatever it might be. And I think that's like another interesting thing, is that obviously Sova has been difficult as he is another information gathering agent, but there's been lots of patches which have either broken arrows or you've had to change lineups. There's a lot of us aspiring Sova mains out there that have been working on stuff, but ultimately it's still the case though that there's not we haven't really seen it's so early, we haven't seen a super developed understanding of how the dynamics can work, and what exactly is super strong with Sova in terms of gathering information and what that frees Cypher up to do. Because Cypher can do a lot of stuff. We're going to see on bind here a lot of more interesting spots for tripwires, for example, than you would normally see. Because mostly when you play split, you're going to see Cypher running around on B. The tripwires will go in the same spots most of the time. So yeah, it's loses its power if you know where Cypher's stuff is, because he's doing it the same every round. You've lost a massive amount of the power of Cypher, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it was Sean that talked about this originally, where we both kind of agreed in the future you're going to be seeing more Cyphers like spreading their utility throughout the map. Like on Split especially, I had a Cypher that I was playing with that would play B, of course, but he would put a trip in mid, because I would just keep refreshing the mid stairs and they would try to walk through my smoke. So he's like, okay, I'll just put a tripwire down. They try walking through a smoke, just kill one through the smoke. You can do like so many different things like that. It's just like you always get Cyphers that are kind of like, what's the best way to put this, kind of like rats just sitting on a site and they got all their equipment for themselves. And it's like, well, we can help each other, like you don't have to use your cages as smokes. Like I can smoke for you, you can use a tripwire for me. Like just synergizing between two agents instead of like, okay, you're Cypher, you play for yourself, like you are on one site by yourself, you have to lock it down every time. It's like there's more than just like one way of playing that type of scenario.
You just reminded me of that clip, I think that you linked in one of the discords. I think it was on Split, like the Cypher just sat at the back of the A site,
Oh
with
yeah.
surrounded by his own tripwires in camera. Is that a clip you can load up? Because that just actually perfectly explained what you were talking about. It's actually hilarious.
Yeah, we can throw it in at the end here. It's from Kefri, I think.
Oh no. It's got to be a troll at this point. Wasn't Kefri the one who was also with the jet, just like
Yeah.
being the general, throwing in his troops to the slaughter,
Yeah.
whilst he sits back and watches?
I don't know, man. It works sometimes.
Oh man. I just don't know if it's for the memes or not at this point.
Apparently he
Um,
streams like 20, 30 hours at a time or something ridiculous like that. So
Gotcha. Well, as we can see here as well, like lots of like really interesting usages of the cages around the map. And what's really interesting as well is the cages, much like the Viper poison clouds, can be used really effectively to aid your teammates. And just think of the various setups that you can have for either retakes or for just like mid-round plays. Like, you can set a lot of stuff up that can really be of great use for your team to block off line of sight for specific amounts of time. Once you really get, honestly, like there's so much you can do in this game because of how unique the utility is, how every agent has 4 bits of unique utility. There's so much you can do. So I really can't wait to see exactly how people start to understand how to use stuff like this aggressively, because that's, playing defensively is pretty intuitive most of the time. I put this down, like even this one, for example, we even see the one ways that Viper's throwing from those positions on that same spot. It's like pretty intuitive. It's like, okay, I'll put this down in the defensive choke point. I know the enemies have to go through this choke point because they have to get to this. This is like one of the 2 avenues for this bomb site. So that's pretty predictable. That's intuitive. Like we all understand how that works. But in terms of setting up aggressive plays that can be used maybe for information in the mid round or for retakes, like now this is stuff that actually requires additional setups, stuff that your opponents won't see coming, and stuff that actually allows you to have really big advantages in spots that, again, cannot really be accounted for by your opposition. That's when it gets really interesting. This is also hilarious. Just like the ropes, actually, ropes one way is disgusting. I love that.
I feel like people right now give too much respect to the cages. Whenever I play, people just like they're more likely to walk through a brimstone smoke than a Cypher cage because of sound cue. But what I've noticed a lot is like you get the sound cue, but they always spam the middle, right? Because that's like the most intuitive spot. You're not going to spam like left or right or like one of the sides. So if you just walk around the edges of it, like you have to go through it, but if you just walk through the edges, you still kind of get an advantage on them because they're either spamming or they're just waiting for you to come through one side. And I feel like Cypher cages are a lot like CS smokes, where it's kind of just this wall. It's not curved like the other smokes, so you're in it until you're out of it, and you don't really know until you're like peeking them.
Yeah, and some of these cages are really cool. Like the fact that that we saw the one which was created a one way on spawn, and from basically standing from the default plant spot as well, the safe plant spot behind the box. Where I love stuff like this, where it's like it's so practical because you can, it's that situation where maybe you're planting, you throw it up there, and then you get to reposition towards under ropes there, and that's a really cool spot, or cool way to play a post plant. So I'm really loving a lot of these different ideas for the cages and the ways that they can be also used a little bit more aggressively. And Cypher cameras can, are super important to find like lots of interesting Cypher cameras. And also, it's really important. I think I'm probably going to rehash a point I think that you made earlier, Mike. It's really important that people start to understand that you shouldn't just use Cypher in one specific way all of the time, because it really takes away from the value he adds everywhere else, and he can add a lot of value everywhere else. I think it was I think I saw a tweet from Lex after his nerfs saying that he's like basically, going to be crap now after the nerfs, and he then did take it back saying that, okay, I've seen people adjusting really well. But it's interesting because we only saw one tiny slice of how Cypher could be played, which is extremely weighted towards the fact that you have all these glitch cams, and his abilities are so strong in stopping people. It doesn't. This is exactly the point we were making before about weapons. If you have one weapon that's always the best choice, even for every single scenario, why would you ever choose any of the other weapons ever? You just wouldn't. Even if some of them are slightly better in close range than the one that you chose, you're still going to pick the one that's generally very good in every single spot. And so with Cypher, it's like, well, if Cypher stuff, even if people know the cages are there, if they are super strong and actually no one really knows how to break positions with Cypher, of course you'll just always see Cypher doing that, which means that you're slowing down the development of how the agents played. So I think that a lot of people, just saw Cypher as that one trick pony, and they don't really see the value that he has elsewhere. So yeah, I'm liking so Doug does some great work, kind of just finding a lot of cool tricks with Cypher to show the varying ways you can use him around the map, especially with the tripwires and stuff like that, which we'll see. So
What do you
that's
think
pretty cool.
about the tripwires being able to be picked up and reused?
I think that's good because I think that the tripwires themselves are pretty easy to deal with, especially if you're lurking. And I think I think it feels kind of sucky as a Cypher player to be like, let's say you set up on B on split there, for example, and then you have to rotate to A for a retake. And then it doesn't feel like you're playing Cypher anymore. If you used all of your utility, maybe you decided to set things up defensively, or maybe it was a late hit and you've used some of the cages that maybe you did disperse throughout the map, and the one thing, the things that you have left are the camera and the tripwires, and so it feels kind of sucky to just be Cypher, play around, but not be able to use any of your abilities. So I like the fact that he can, let's say, if in this example where he's rotating B to A for a retake on split, that maybe he's thinking, okay, I'm Cypher, so I'm going to try to find ways to try to use these tripwires. Maybe it's like I'm going to take Heaven because I want to be able to protect my team from a flank if the other team has a ramp control and most of my team is focusing on Heaven and screens for my retake. I want to make sure that if there are players lurking a ramp, that they have to destroy a tripwire. Then you're playing Cypher. It's so that's kind of the argument I have for it. And I don't think that they're particularly strong. So I like the idea that you can use them and move them around. Do you disagree?
No, I think it'd be like people wouldn't care as much if you lost your utility when you died. I think a lot of people just get annoyed because it's like, oh, they didn't come to a site. Now he picks it up and now he gets to keep his utility. So, should I queue up the next Haven
Yeah.
video?
And Racing Rotary, who recorded the videos, is saying that a lot of a note is that a lot of the cages were to show that the height change removed a lot of the one ways, which I actually forgot to mention because actually they were just generally like good cages anyway. So
Yeah, I feel like the
even without the one
cages,
way.
I feel like they're even better now because if you think like B split, if you're splitting through Heaven on the attacking side, you're kind of at a disadvantage because at some point you have to drop down to the site, right? Well, his cage extends top to bottom from Heaven run out. So you could literally just have like this fireman's pole basically that just gets you into the site without being seen.
Fireman's spot, I like it. So yeah, it's here we have some Haven stuff as well. And again, I think it's really cool to see all of the various placements for a bomb site, right? Because I actually don't see very many placements for cameras on bomb sites. Because again, the general consciousness of how you play Cypher is I use my camera to get information, and I'm not going to be using my camera to think about retakes. Um, and I think that's definitely where people have missed a trick in certain respects. I've actually like whenever I've been playing Cypher on a lot of maps, I try to find these kinds of cameras that we just saw, where it's like, okay, where is like a high point on the site I can find? It's not like a glitch or anything, but like it's just a super high point on the site. No one's ever going to be looking there, and if they do take that bomb site and we're going for a retake, that information is super critical because also in the chaos of taking a site or just throwing your abilities down. They're running to plant the bomb. They're running to get into position. You can probably get multiple tags from a well-placed camera because people are not really looking up, and they're not, and because there's so much stuff happening on the screen, and they're all thinking about stuff, and they know that they have no danger of actually being shot from anything, and their attention is distracted as mentioned. So you do actually get the ability to get a lot of value from the camera on the retake. So it's definitely something I'd advise people to consider more.
Yeah, and one Cypher I played a week ago, I think he was one of the better ones I've played against because on Haven, he was playing C site, and you know when you run up along that tight left corner, he would put the camera like up high in that top left corner. It's like, well, you might clear that corner when you're running up, but you're not going to just look all the way up at the top of the roof. And that's a really good position because even if they spot it and kill it, people don't really think enough about like crosshair readjustment in this game. Well, someone has to turn completely around and look at that corner and have their crosshair like up at the roof. that's a really good opportunity for the Cypher just to swing out, get the one frag, and then hide backside and then reposition for another.
Yeah, there's almost like a little meta game that exists of like all the ciphers start like popping the camera in a spot where it's somewhat obvious, but they're going to go out of the camera again. So you're going to hear it, it's going to disappear, and you're going to want to shoot it as that person because it's not, showing to you, but you kind of have a kind of relative understanding of the spot. And then that's when the cipher like swings out to kill. Just like they just take that moment to swing. That could be an interesting kind of meta. I don't know if that's actually how good that is, given that it does take like a second. It feels like a full second for the camera to disappear after you're out of it. But still, there's definitely a lot to be experimented with in terms of Cypher and what you can do with the cameras. And I think this video is showing in a pretty effective way, again, like the fact that you can have a different placement of the camera every round. And that's actually good. That's very, very good, because it just allows you to always have the element of surprise on your opponent. They never know what spot you're playing. They never know quite how you're going to play it. If you hit them with a dart, it's such a big advantage. Oh, I like this one a lot. That's really cool. That's a very cool camera. That's like the kind of cameras that the Riot devs want to see people finding, as opposed to the glitch cams.
Oh, this is dirty.
This? Oh,
that's how to be an aggressive Cypher.
Oh man, that's pretty sick. I thought that was gonna be a glitch cam, but it's not. It's just really creative. That's awesome.
I feel like Cypher too, him and Silva aren't really cut from the same cloth, because I've yet to see any like really creative, aggressive Cyphers. They're all just like ones that have their stuff set up on the site, but occasionally they just push up, try to get a kill, fall off with like a cage to cover them or something. I've yet to see stuff like this, where it's like you have a really good aggressive camera, you have someone with you, you spot it out, clear out that area, and then you keep like taking ground.
Yeah, it's so strong too, because it gives you a lot of options to kind of reset afterwards. Like you could decide to keep pushing, you could decide to then give up that position, fall all the way back. Now you have this really aggressive camera that's going to survive for some time, because then the other team has to decide. It's kind of like, you know what, actually it reminds me? It reminds me exactly of Inferno in CSGO, when a team takes banana control and they throw that deep smoke. It then puts the onus on the attackers to decide, do we want to challenge for that smoke and really see what's behind it? Or do we want to just allow them to have this position? We don't want to take a risk, because maybe there is two people behind that smoke ready to kill us all. Or, we don't know. We don't want to take that risk. So we're just going to go top mid instead. And it reminds me of that idea, because a statement is coming from the defenders of, we have all this control. What are you going to do about it right now? We've invested to get that control. So maybe we'll weak elsewhere, but you don't know for sure. So it's like this really interesting idea in that sense. So there's a lot of potential with that kind of stuff that, again, I think we're going to really just need to see the pro scene develop to really see what that potential looks like when it's executed with good coordination and understanding.
People use glitch cameras are so lazy. Like, look at all these good cameras that aren't really exploiting anything. They're just normally placed on map architecture, and people are just like, oh, I need to place it inside an object and see through walls and never be able to have it destroyed. It's like, there's so many better cameras that people can do. It's just they don't take the time to actually learn them.
It's so incredibly short-sighted. But the thing is that, like, ultimately, those are the kinds of people that may even, I'm not going to say that they're cheaters, but it feels like it falls into that mentality in a sense, because it's extremely short-sighted. If you care about actually being good and you're playing competitively, right, in any sense, whether it's matchmaking or otherwise, you should be thinking about that. Like, think about it. Like, obviously these things will get patched out of the game. There is just, obviously it's an exploit. It's obviously not intended that you can see through walls and shoot through walls and stuff like that. That doesn't make any sense. So why would you think to invest time into that? Doesn't make any sense. Because what happens is when that patch comes through, you get nerfed. Like, it's not just that the character, like, that those things get nerfed, but you get nerfed because you've just invested all this time in a dead end. Makes no sense. So yeah, I think you wanted to show that. Well, do you want to pull up that clip of the the Cypher, was it Kefri stream you said?
I don't have it
Where-
up yet, but we have one
Okay.
more video
Oh,
from
right.
Twitter on Split.
Oh, of course. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. So, did you watch this one already?
I watched a fair few of it before the show started. It's like just interesting tripwire spots that aren't like placing them wall to wall, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that one against the barrel there is that trash can is one I use pretty often as well.
Oh yeah, and I really like this camera. I feel like this is like an actually good camera because if you come out, people have to readjust their crosshair all the way up, and it's just on normal map like buildings.
So not an exploit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to see. It's really nice because it kind of sucked to see the fact that people are using Cypher in this way, because it's just like, well, when are you going to get to the like when are you going to do the work to actually show me what this agent's capable of? Like the people that are investing time in this agent, like when am I going to see you actually showing us, like, pushing the envelope in how this guy should be played? Because it just seems so like his growth has been stunted. Like he had like a really bad diet growing up, just just a shadow of what it should be.
Okay, I got the clip ready after we watched through this.
Okay, nice. I'm looking forward to some
Also,
comic relief.
another thing to talk about would be like what utility you can use to actually destroy Cypher's traps besides just like shooting them. Like his tripwires and stuff can be destroyed by Silva's shock darts. Raise's utility works on them. Trying to think of what else actually applies.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I mean Razor's stuff will work as well. I don't know if you already said Razor's stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Brimstone's ult doesn't destroy anything. It's really weird.
Yeah,
Because
I don't
you
get
think
that.
that it would destroy everything, just like leave a hole in the map, but it doesn't destroy anything. I'm trying to think actually, what else would destroy stuff? I don't think that there's anything else. Oh, maybe Breach's aftershock
Oh
potentially.
yeah, that gets it. Yeah.
It goes? Okay. I don't know if there's anything else actually.
I think it's just those three. But I feel like a lot of Silvas don't really use their shock darts for anything, right? They don't have lineups where it's like, oh, I know this person stands in this position all the time. That's like a really effective way to get pretty good value for that investment in utility.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, completely agree. Especially in defaulting, whereby like it actually frustrates me so much when I play against one-dimensional ciphers that have the same placements all the time, and I have like a Kosovo or someone on my team. It's like the amount of value you get from a shock dart that costs 100 credits, and you can just destroy all this shit the ciphers leaving all over the place. That's so strong. That's so strong, especially because, I mean, this is actually something that's really annoying. We'll talk about this on a future episode of some description about like just how does defaulting work, because the amount of games I've played where people don't really understand defaulting, and then they want to like push B late round, but nobody's cleared any of the tripwires, no one's forced any of the cages out, and it's like, well, how well do you think this is going to go exactly? It's especially given that you didn't force anything out mid, so Sage has all of her shit as well, so good luck doing anything. But yeah, so we can talk about that later. But yeah, that's definitely something that's worth noting. And Racing Road Through is saying, that's something that Fish 123 did well. And I would expect that they're probably going to be the most innovative, which is why they've clearly been the most successful. And it's no surprise why. Right. So with that said, I think we've pretty much come to the end of today's episode.
There's some
I think
comedy if you want.
All right, let's run it. So this is just an amusing moment once again. I mean, how are you? What was it that you said that reminded me of this earlier? Just Cypher's
Cypher's just
playing by themselves.
Yeah.
If you want to get to them, just work together and mark it. Work together and mark it. You just crouch and watch it.
I'm holding from in here.
30 seconds left.
Oh, there's no sound on the
Guys,
video, I
I'm
think, Mike.
ulting.
Or is there?
There is.
Cool.
Rob,
Okay, never mind.
Last one was mid.
Roomba?
The Roomba always gets me.
Yeah.
Nice
Grab that
job.
up. I can't hold it.
Bomb is marked.
Amazing. I love those clips. Those are brilliant, aren't they? It's just so
Yep.
good. What a clear demonstration. Right. Yeah. So there you go. That's episode 6 in the books. Thank you all for joining us. I know that it's a sad shame not to have Sean on, but we will get him as soon as he's back. And I think Mike did a great job. Talking more than normal. I think normally you only say a few sentences per episode, so that's awesome. We will be able to do some more content this week, so you can expect that. Just again, as I mentioned previously, make sure that you are checking out Twitter, and if you're ever unsure, we tend to always use the hashtag Immortal Minds, so you can just search that. And if you don't want to search through all of my tweet history or whatever, and look at latest, and you'll probably see if anything's going on relating to the show or the content that we've been talking about. So, thank you very much. And if you have any clips that you want to send in of pretty much anything for the future episodes for us to discuss, or maybe you just want to stroke your ego a little bit, you had a really nice highlight and you want to get it on the show and see our reaction to it, then please submit them. Tag myself, Sean, Mike, use the hashtag Immortal Minds, and we would love to feature that on the following shows. Also, last note is, of course, we will be deciding how the next Agent episode is going to look like. I think having a kind of Agent Bonanza would be pretty cool. I think that it is a cool goal to maybe complete the list of agents going into the first week of release. Given that also the first week of release means that we'll start to have more competitions. And one of the big value propositions of this show, I think one of the identities of this show, is that we want to be able to break down professional level play. We want to kind of push the envelope in the thinking around how strategy and tactics will work. And once we have a lot of data coming from these competitive teams, we're really going to be able to start going into things, and stuff is going to get really interesting and really fun. So yeah, that's stuff that you guys can look forward to in the future. But for now, that is everything from myself and Mike. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.